want to welcome you all for our first speaker series talk of the new year. My name is Lana Zaiter, and I'm a PhD candidate in Educational Studies at McGill University. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that we are on the Kanien'kehá:ka traditional territory. We recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which some of us gather today. I also encourage you to acknowledge the indigenous lands in your context as well. Joining us for our first talk is Professor Lourdes Ortega from the Department of Linguistics at Georgetown University, and her talk today is titled, "What's the Multi-Plural Turn in SLA Got to Do with Social Justice?" I will pass it on now to Dr. Angelica Galante, the director of the Plurilingual Lab.
Hello, everybody. It's very nice to be here with you. Thank you all for coming. And thank you so much, Dr. Lourdes Ortega, for accepting our invitation. We're thrilled to have you here. Professor Ortega is a professor in the Department of Linguistics at Georgetown University. She is best known for an award-winning meta-analysis titled Effectiveness of L2 Instruction, a research synthesis and quantitative meta-analysis published in 2000. Wow, it's been 24 years already. So this work has been cited nearly 4,000 times. If you haven't read it, please do. She was also the recipient of the Paul Pimsleur Award and the TESOL Distinguished Research Award in 2000. She wrote the bestseller graduate-level textbook, Understanding Second Language Acquisition, published in 2009 by Routledge. This book was translated to Mandarin in 2016. This book is assigned here at McGill to our graduate-level course titled Second Language Learning, and students always talk about how Dr. Ortega's writing is so easy to read, despite the complexities of the topics. Some of the topics include cross-linguistic influence, cognition, motivation, just to name a few. Not every academic can write about so many areas of second language acquisition, and Dr. Ortega does so in a very accessible and I would say beautiful way. It's always a delight to read her work. Since 2010, Lourdes Ortega has been championing a bilingual and social justice turn in the field of second language acquisition. She is a multilingual herself, originally from southern Spain, and she negotiates and embraces Espanol, English, and Greek in her life. So it's a delight to have you here, Dr. Ortega, and thank you so much for being here.
So during the talk, please keep your video and sound off. However, you may use the reaction at the bottom of your screen, either the thumbs up or hands clapping feature to react to Dr. Ortega's talk. The talk will be recorded and available in the Plurilingual Lab YouTube channel. Usually the social media strategist of the Plurilingual Lab will make an announcement on our social media platforms to announce when the talk is ready for you to access it. So make sure to follow our pages as well. After the talk, we will have about 30-minute discussion where you can ask your questions and engage with Dr. Ortega. During the talk, you can post your questions in the chat. And after the talk, you can either unmute yourself, unmute your microphone and ask a question. And the discussion will be moderated by Hannah Kame and it will not be recorded. And now, without further ado, Professor Ortega, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen and also ensure that everyone sees my PowerPoint and can hear me. Can someone indicate, Lana? Yeah, everything okay? The sound too? Okay, good. Thank you very, very much for bringing me here to this audience. I was just going up and down the Zoom, looking at who has joined, and it's amazing. There are also quite a few people that I know very well, former students, colleagues, friends. So thank you very, very much for making this possible. And let me start by thanking specifically Angelica, Lana, Hannah, Kiana, for whom I didn't find a photo. And they're all here facilitating the Plurilingual Lab speaker series. And I'm very grateful for their support and for their invitation. And let me start by introducing myself a little bit more and talk about me and my journey in the multilingual trajectory that I have had for 24 years now, as Angelica was mentioning. I was born, raised, and college educated in southern Spain. So I spent the first 24 years of my life in the very, very most southern tip of Spain. And then most of my 20s I spent in northern Greece and then in Athens. After that, I have also spent a lot of time in Hawaii, first as a student and later on when I returned as a faculty member. And since 2012, I've been in Washington, D.C. I've also skipped a few other places I've been to in the United States and in Europe as part of my language and culture and identity journey. So that means that I have been a native and a non-native speaking teacher of languages like English and Spanish, but even modern Greek, I've taught a little bit. Since age 24, I've been embracing the identity of a non-native speaker, but not always of English. And for more than 30 years now, I've been a primary non-native English user. I'm definitely a multilingual. I keep the love and the use of Spanish, Greek, English, and some German. And I'm also, a big part of my identity is as an SLA researcher, second language acquisition researcher. And I work and educate from the unceded land that belongs to the Nacotchtank people, also known as Anacostans, who were the native Algonquian people who lived in this area of Washington, D.C., where I live during the 17th century. Their descendants are the Piscataway, and they live today in a part of Maryland called Prince George's County. I also do my work, research, and teaching at a university that ensured its long-term existence through the sale of 272 slaves in 1838 for the equivalent of what's now $3 million. So in acknowledging these two facts, I acknowledge and regret the ties that make indigenous theft and slavery not things of the past, but problems of the present and problems that plague education. So my journey with my multi-plural turns, as I will tell you today in this talk, has to do with discovering the monolingual bias out of personal experience and then professional training, thinking a lot about alternatives in second language acquisition, epistemological alternatives, ways of thinking about learning and language that are more social, and then discovering social justice as an imperative for the discipline. All these musings about what SLA is or can be have led me in the end to equitable multilingualism, the idea of equitable multilingualism, and much more recently even the idea that decolonizing and thinking in Southern theory and epistemology's way may be an imperative as well when we think of social justice and second language acquisition. So let me talk about the monolingual bias and theoretical alternatives for SLA, which I consider my first part of the journey, probably the first 10 years of my career. Obviously, in both research, teaching, and in the field of second language acquisition, we have had a tremendous hold with the idea that learning a language is achieving monolingual-like, native-like speaker perception. And there is so much linguistic insecurity that gets instilled out of this. So that was like the first thing that made me really question my training, my work, and what I was doing in second language acquisition. Ironically, we've always known, and we have had people from bilingual education and bilingualism, people from second language acquisition, people from applied linguistics tell us that bilinguals can never be two monolinguals in one. And so the critique of native speakerism and monolingual bias has been very pervasive and very old in the field. And yet native speakerism is tremendously durable. Just in 2022, I wrote a chapter with Jean-Marc Dewelle and Thomas Bach, trying to explore why it is so durable and what we can do about it. And I recommend everyone this book if you don't know it. Very, very interesting set of chapters around the changing face of the native speaker. The entry point for SLA to counter the monolingual bias, I found in this idea of epistemic pluralism. I was looking for theories that would allow me to do SLA work and at the same time counter monolingual biases. And so one of the products of those engagements and searches was the 2011 book that Dwight Atkinson edited, where I have a chapter and where we explore the so-called alternative approaches to second language acquisition. And definitely my conviction is that we need epistemological alternatives and we need epistemological pluralism and diverse theories of social dimensions of second language learning. The Douglas Fair Group is also a paper that many of you probably know, and I was involved in it together with 14 other authors. Most of them are there in the photo, but none of them. And again, it was a natural outcome of searching and searching for epistemological plurality in the field. And so for me, I was looking at things like conversation analysis, systemic functional linguistics, Vygotsky and sociocultural theory, language socialization theory, identity theory. But for me, it was also about how do we do linguistic cognitive work in second language acquisition? Are there any entry points besides abandoning that kind of research completely, where we would be doing research in an anti-deficit way that counters the monolingual bias? So basically what I'm explaining here is a journey from witnessing and participating in epistemological crisis in second language acquisition to convincing myself really deeply that the real problem was the monolingual bias. And then in my case, I found a way forward with usage-based linguistics. For many of you, if you don't know these scholars, they come all from bilingualism and especially linguistics, but first language, monolingual-like linguistics, I would call them actually. And then we have, of course, Diane Larsen-Freeman as a huge proponent of usage-based approaches of the particular kind of complexity theory and dynamic systems theory. And she was super influential for me and for so many in my generation and in the later generations, trying to create a space within second language acquisition that looks at language, looks at learning, does it in a cognitive and in a linguistic way, but doesn't do it in a deficit-oriented way. And so one of the contributions of usage-based linguistics is that they allow for an idea of language and learning, communication, grammar as open systems. This theory of linguistics shows that language is massively polysemous, that it's irreducibly ambiguous, and that it's integrally multimodal and multisensorial. So it really leads us naturally to the idea of the openness of language, where we know that there is no perfect correspondence between what is said by language, or even how many languages we know or don't know, and the meanings we are able to make. And of course, this very naturally merges with the idea of translanguaging, as I will connect later. With usage-based theories, we can also think of child bilingualism and adult second language acquisition as a big continuum. without any big fundamental difference. And thus, we can think of bilingualism as just a phenomenon that encompasses all kinds of ages into the same kind of reality of language learning over the lifespan. So what does social justice have to do with this? That's when I enter into the area of inequitable multilingualism. At least since Pearl and Lambert and then Fishman, we have known that in language learning, inequities manifest themselves in whose multilingualism is accepted and praised, whose multilingualism is viewed as a problem, and whose multilingualism remains invisible. All multilinguals and bilinguals frequently experience oppression. Oppression because they constantly are being positioned by others as a novice or a foreigner or an outside member or a non-native speaker. They are constantly being told that their language is not good enough or not good enough yet. But there are systemic structural forces stacking the deck against certain groups more than others. And of course, will the societal language, in many of the studies that we have, in many of our educational practices being English, will English open all doors in life? Is it about language that we're talking about? Of course, we're talking about language, but also race and ethnicity, class, occupation and wealth, religion, sex, ability, age, sexual orientation. Who is a legitimate speaker of a language? Someone who not only sounds it, but also looks it. Others talk to us depending on how we sound and look. And so the isms are inescapable. They will be different in different communities and in different societies, but they seem to be inescapable. And that's when we come to the idea of radiolinguistics that Flores and Rosa have so aptly presented to the field of education. Let me give you an example with a study from Ahuja and Ballinger from your own Plurilingual lab. This study was about the socialization into second language of 8th, 3rd, and 5th graders who were from immigrant backgrounds, and they were enrolled in a Greater Montreal French medium public primary school. And I chose Rose as one of the children. She was born in Morocco and had arrived in Quebec at the age of 5, and she was now 8 years old and was doing grade 3. Her mom claimed that Rose spoke only French at home and had forgotten her Arabic. But Rose herself believed that she only spoke a little bit of French. Yet the researchers agreed, I think, with her mom and estimated that Rose used French daily. Rose also intimated to the researchers that she liked working in pairs with Iris, a peer friend in the classroom, who spoke a little French and a little Arabic like her, because she says, when I don't know a word, since Iris, she speaks a lot of Arabic, I can ask her. So she's getting help in Arabic for the French that she doesn't understand from her friend Iris. And Rose's mother also shared the experience at home that her daughter used English and Arabic to help neighboring newcomer Syrian children with their French homework. So not only Arabic, but also English, and she's using to help other children in the neighborhood. So what's going on here? How multi-competent, multilingual is Rose? Does she speak French? Does she speak Arabic? Does she not? What's going on? Well, clearly she's being socialized into deficit, into thinking that she doesn't speak basically anything. But socialization aside, there is also awareness and resistance, and many second language users call out linguicism when they see it. For example, in this study by Tracy Derwin, also in Canada, 100 immigrants in a community college in Edmonton said things about how they viewed their own accents, things that were very interesting to me. For example, they, meaning other speakers of English, they don't pay attention to you if your English isn't good. They don't listen as carefully to people who have an accent. When I work for a company, my colleagues don't understand. They joke. I feel bad very often. Accent is more important than race. So there is more racism against accent than against race. And sometimes people just don't want to understand you, right? So what we discover through all these studies is that identity, agency, ideology, and power matter, and that there are consequences for language learning, actual consequences for actual language learning. And therefore, this is the association and the relationship that I see between social justice and second language acquisition, a very direct one, actually. So let's think about multilingual success. What is success? And here's where I can bring the notion of translanguaging in. What is competence or proficiency? And who is to tell? This is really a big question that we seldom allow ourselves to explore in the field of second language acquisition. Let's take the example of ordering a meal, and let's take a fast food establishment, just ordering burgers and Cokes and French fries. Normally, this happens, this comes up a lot in textbooks, and what we have is the idea of social roles. So we tell students, okay, you're the counter worker, you're the customer, let's now try to use the language to order the food that you want. But there is so much more going on always with language, right? So if you go to Goffman, you can think of social goals and framing instead of roles. So what's happening really in the moment of the interaction? And so for ordering a meal, you may also be thinking of the allergies that you have as you're scanning the menu. Or you may be thinking about the movie that you need to go after. Or you may be outraged when you realize that they're going to charge you extra for the ketchup. And so suddenly what language competence and using language means in this instance is that in addition to ordering your fast food meal, you really need to be or want to be expressing anxiety in some ways, imploring someone to hurry, or articulating disapproval. All of this is happening at once. And so eventually, this is really what a superior proficiency speaker should do in the language, right? Not just ordering the food, but doing all these other things. And what was routinely into making meaning way more than language. I love this example from Li Wei because it's simple and direct. How do we know that I love New York is what we're saying when we see this. It's because whatever bits of semiotic repertoire we have, we use to make meaning and to communicate always, and it's always multisensorial and multimodal. And so all language users will draw on multiple resources, including any languages they know and other non-language means. All pieces and bits of past and present knowledge will help. And that's translanguaging, but also that's the openness of language that I was discussing earlier from a more usage-based linguistic perspective. So we have the work of Ofelia Garcia and Li Wei that has been so influential, particularly since their book in 2014. And Li Wei was one of the speakers for the Plurilingual Lab series. And also in Europe, we have the work of Jason Esenos and Dirk Gorter, who have been applying translanguaging to contexts of minoritized languages, such as Basque. And I'm having a senior moment. Gorter, I cannot remember right now his minority language in the Netherlands. This book, who just appeared in 2021, I think, is a very good resource on pedagogical translanguaging, especially for minoritized languages. So what we have is a hugely developed field of translanguaging with notions that cover the pedagogical, the sociolinguistic, and the psychoneurolinguistic. And there are key definitional points in the pedagogical is the use of the home language and the mixing of languages in the classroom. In the sociolinguistic, we have the big debate on whether there are languages are bounded and named, or they should be unnamed and unbounded. And in psychoneurolinguistics, we have the discussion of whether there is a unitary system, psycholinguistically speaking. The brain handles all languages as one single unitary system. These key definitional aspects of translanguaging have generated a lot of disagreement, and especially since the book by McCorney and Pennycook in 2006, and that takes translanguaging into a post-structuralist decolonizing vision. And I think it's fine to have disagreements, but I think there are some things that we also ignore. And so allow me a side thought. Translanguaging is for sure a lot more than just stimulating the use of the first language or the home language in the classroom. There's a lot more behind translanguaging. But often we forget that we definitely have conclusive quantitative evidence that the use of the first language fosters best second language skills and highest levels of bilingualism and biliteracy. So an author that is often underlooked or overlooked, and I don't know why, is Amanda Brown at Syracuse University. She has published by now 3 studies in 2019, 2022, and 2023, demonstrating empirically, quantitatively, with very meaningful comparisons in classrooms and very carefully designed studies, that a multilingual pedagogy, an L1 home language-based pedagogy, results in as many benefits or more benefits for language learning than a target language only pedagogy. And she has shown these for English, for French, and for Arabic, 3 target languages. And Adam Winsler in George Mason University, one of the neighboring universities in my area, he published a study in 2014, and that is like Jim Cummins's best dream come true. It's a study in Miami with nearly 20,000 children who were followed from kindergarten through grade 5th. And the study uncovers that greater first language, home language competence is associated with greater English success in school. This is, I mean, we think we know because we are convinced that, of course, the first language and the home language helps develop the second language, is the best affordance and the best basis for developing all the other languages as well. But I don't know why we have such great studies that are not cited and not utilized for, public advocating of these things. So back from the side thought, I see translanguaging and plurilingualism as a way to open our pedagogies to the psycholinguistic realities of multilinguals. And I take a more usage-based linguistic approach, but I think it's very compatible with translanguaging and plurilingualism. And I also think that we need a translanguaging and plurilingualism because we need to cultivate an awareness of both world Englishes and unequal Englishes and unequal world Spanishes, world Arabics, world Chineses. So we need an awareness, a critical awareness of the hierarchies of languages and how power is always present in language education. But also even more is needed, I feel. And so let me talk a little bit more about multilingual success when it's even more than just an anti-deficit stance or a very bilingual instead of monolingual outlook on what we're doing, or a translanguaged pedagogy. This is a piece of data that I have from one of my students from many, many years ago, and she was a college ESL teacher in training, and in her journal that she was writing for me for one of my classes, she recounted this experience with one of her students. She said, Once I had a student who kept saying, I came from Korea. I tried to correct her grammar by saying, if you are originally from Korea, you should use present tense when you refer to it. This was my student trying to be a grammar teacher, right? And her student responded, since I don't want to go back to Korea and I identify myself with American, I'd rather say I came from Korea and wish to be an American one day. My student was totally taken aback as a teacher and didn't know what to respond. But I think what this example clearly shows is that this student, this ESL student, had a very deep knowledge of what the past tense does in English, what it serves, what kind of meaning it gives you. It puts distance between the moment of speaking and something that happened in the past, right? And so it's not a matter of grammar, and this person doesn't need a grammar correction. This person needs a resource that allows her to say what she wants to say with the tools that English can give her. Maybe something like, you know, I'm originally from Korea, and that would have conveyed what she wants to say instead of I came from Korea. So this example shows that people want to use language so as to be seen, heard, and judged in desirable ways, in the ways that they consider desirable in their actual and imagined social worlds. Another example from a study by Richard Sampson in Japan. An EFL student in college says, do you want something to drink? It's like a textbook. It's not me, but want something to drink? It's like I'm actually saying it. That's like my image now, like it's me. So again, what we see here is that people want to feel their languages are them. This is a matter of identity, not just learning language. And finally, another example from Peggy Dufon many years ago in a study, one of the very early first books in study abroad language learning. Kyle was learning Indonesian. He was from the United States, and he was learning vocabulary. Things like pedas means spicy and asin means salty. But he was also learning how to do speech acts like complimenting the food, it's delicious, enak, or it's tasteless, which apparently is also allowed in the etiquette of culinary table manners in Indonesia. But also Kyle said something else in his journal, his learning journal. He says, my eating behavior has changed. Now I eat a lot in the morning, plus my eating etiquette has changed. Things that taste good taste really good. I kind of look at the food differently with more respect. So what this example is showing us is that learning a language will change us in more than just linguistic ways. It's a matter of socialization and transculturality, and it will really make us be ourselves, but just not our old selves. So success, I think, has to address ideologies of deficit, which of course are rampant in society in general, but specifically in classrooms and in studies. And we need to be talking about empowerment and about awareness of inequities if we are going to talk about successful multilinguals. We need to understand that language learning is much more than just about language, and our students and our people that we support, multilinguals we support, need to understand that. And so the openness of language is an important concept that, unless teachers and students intuit, I think it's very difficult to create success in multilingual learning. What does it mean to be a competent language user? So this idea of success versus failure, and who is to tell? Let me say a little bit more about it. Some minoritized speakers will develop a multilingual ideology, a positive, affirming multilingual ideology. For example, Judith, a Hungarian 28-year-old who had been living in Finland for 5 years and spoke Finnish really well in this study by Ruska. So she says, my friends always laugh at me because I very directly translate a lot of these Hungarian, well, Because in Finnish, you say, for example, to put the cat on the table, to bring up a difficult topic. Well, things like that. I translate from Hungarian to Finnish, and then everybody asks, what do you mean? And what is that? But I always tell them that in this situation, I do that on purpose. Of course, I try, especially when I write, not to write like that. But often I enjoy it that I use language a bit differently and people get used to it. And I like it. I like to tell people about it, that I say it because in Hungarian there is a saying like that. I don't necessarily think that's a mistake because I always explain why I said it that way. So this is a very willful, creative, and confident multilingual with a very positive ideology of multilingualism, nudging friends to learn a little bit of Hungarian while communicating in Finnish, right? And of course, she is translanguaging. Indira is an 11-year-old, originally from Pakistan, going to school in North England. And this comes from a study from Swanwick, Wright, and Salter. And Indira explains, I signed to my dad, who is deaf. My mom uses English and Punjabi both. I am learning Urdu from my auntie, and I can speak some now. When I talk to my friends on the phone, I speak English. I use Facebook and sign with my deaf friends. I learn Arabic at mosque. It's easy. I talk to my brother. He's hearing. I talk in English because he does not know Punjabi. So again, a very confident multilingual translanguaging her way through life. And finally, another example from a 17-year-old Mexican-American named Carmen in a study by Borrero in the United States. And Carmen says, but like my Spanish is getting a little bit bad, but I still try to have it. I still speak Spanish. Sometimes I speak Spanglish. It's just like when I don't know a Spanish word, I'll say it in English. And if I don't know it in English, I'll say it in Spanish. It's like an everyday thing. I think it's something that I'm going to use like every day. Yeah, I use it. I translate it from my mom or my grandma and just here in school too. I like being bilingual. So again, a very confident, very happy bilingual, multilingual. So all three studies really show that many minoritized speakers can develop affirming multilingual ideologies that support positive identities. This is part of the multilingual success, I believe, and this is part of what we need to be targeting in multilingual, translingual education. So what's ultimate success in languaging? I think is to know to claim the right to speak, as Bonnie Norton said many years ago, to have the power to impose meanings, as Bourdieu calls it, and to knowing how to language our way so we are seen, heard, and judged in desirable ways that we have determined to be desirable in the moment, depending on the context, the interlocutor, and our goals in our actual and imagined social worlds. And then doing this continuously, lifelong, life-wide, and for the whole person. That to me is ultimate success, languaging and being multilingual. So finally, I am going to talk about social justice, and I'm going to connect it to the decolonial otherwise. I've been, since 2019, I've been in contact with colleagues in South Africa. I've taken several trips. This has been thanks to Multiling in Norway, Oslo. And I'm very grateful to Liz Lanza and Unroinland and all the people at Multiling, because it has really influenced my thinking. And so this last spring, I taught a seminar for doctoral students called Decolonizing Linguistics, where we really explored these issues in depth. And at the end of this last year, just now in December, a special issue called Toward a Decolonial Applied Linguistics was out, that my dear colleague at Georgetown, Anna De Fina, and Marceline Ostendorp in South Africa and Stellenbosch University, and myself worked on for almost 2.5 years. So these are all ways in which I have been engaging with a very different set of ideas about social justice. Social justice, for me, has become a disciplinary imperative in SLA, right? And as I said, until 2019, I was really developing this idea in my mind of inequitable multilingualism is such a reality. How do we incorporate it in our studies, the studies that are even quantitative and cognitive and linguistically oriented? And how do we also incorporate it in our training of doctoral students and in our education of multilinguals and people in the world? And social justice has a simple basic definition: the goal to decrease human suffering and to promote human values of equity and dignity. But I also read a book that made a big impact on me, questioning what kinds of justice do we have in mind? And this book by the very, very influential Eve Tuck and Wayne Young, two decolonial thinkers, talks about how social justice can mean very different things to different people and how we can have diverse dreams of justice in education. And many dreams of social justice are rooted in Eurocentric intellectual traditions and in neoliberalism. And so I started thinking, wait, have I been thinking about multilingual, translanguaging, social justice for language learning in ways that are actually unintendedly counterproductive? It's not the kind of dream of social justice that I want to work for, right? So let's really grapple with the idea that if we do not think of the problem of Eurocentrism and colonialism, we are denying huge historical facts and realities. Well-known facts of the European colonization are that white settlers claim sovereignty through land theft, then they replace indigenous peoples through genocide, slavery, and cultural erasure, and they become majority rulers, overgeneralizing themselves as normal and human, and pathologizing the colonized as deviant and subhuman and in need of salvation. This is a very short summary of a very, very extensive literature and a very grim reality in the present that comes all the way from the past. Between 1492 and 1914, Europeans conquered 80% of the globe, when in fact they only occupy 8% of the planet's landmass. That's massive, massive oppression and colonization. So a decolonial lens asks us to unlearn what we've learned since the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. And I come from Europe, so I've learned a lot about the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, and all of my education through elementary, middle, high school, and my first college degree, which was also from Spain, really is rooted in these traditions of thought, right? But then even in the United States, my master's, my PhD, our field, the authors we cite, the knowledge that we pay attention to is tremendously rooted in this reality of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, creating and inventing knowledge that then claims as universal. So decolonial lenses are asking us to de-link from Western European and Anglo-US knowledge and to hope to relink to pluriversal knowledges that can support an otherwise of being, thinking, sensing, doing, and living in the world. Paul Meehan, one of the former members of your lab, has written about these things in ways that I think are very helpful. And so he has recently talked about the need for trans-epistemic dialogue when we do language education, how we need to engage in decolonial exchanges of knowledges alongside language learning, so that we can emphasize a dynamic plurality of knowledges, not only one dominant, universalizing, and privileged system of knowledge. I think he is very influenced, and I am also very influenced by the work of Mignolo and Catherine Walsh, and this book that we read in my doctoral seminar, from 2018 is the book. And also, I've been reading a lot of Latin American decolonial thinkers, especially, who since the 1990s have been exploring what it may mean to think outside of the colonial matrix, outside of the Eurocentric, Western-centric, US Anglo-centric system of knowledge. So it is important then, I'm realizing, to clarify and to be very, very aware of the dreams of social justice that we use in our work. It's not sufficient for me to invoke social justice, I've realized, but I need to be thinking critically about what I understand under social justice and what forms of social justice I want to embrace or not. And so we can choose to think of social justice from the tools of Western knowledge. And so that would be thinking inside the colonial matrix of power. Or we can be thinking about social justice in a super different way, using Southern, subaltern, indigenous ways of knowing and knowing otherwise. And so this is really what decolonial and Southern epistemologies are asking us to do. So many authors, and I put here a set of them because Quentin Williams is one of the people that have influenced me a lot from South Africa. Many people have, from decolonial and indigenous and Southern thinking, have made the point that the goal is to disrupt white settler colonial logics of language, race, and land. But this is not possible if we try to use the master's tools. And the master's tools is this Eurocentric, Anglo-centric knowledge that was invented by colonialism. So this leaves me with many, many, many questions. It's not an easy position to be in right now, but I keep thinking, how do I create, or how do we create disciplinary support in second language acquisition, the field, to commit to an understanding of learning success and linguistic competence that prioritizes the capacity to use language for social transformation and self-empowerment? How do I, or we as a field, make this non-normative understanding contagious among language educators and SLA fellow researchers? I think it really is very visceral. It's about intuiting and feeling in your body as well as in your mind this otherwise that we need. And finally, can I and can SLA researchers reinvent ourselves and generate empirical and even linguistic cognitive quantitative research about language learning that contributes to this one outside of the Western norm idea of social justice? So I am currently engaged in trying to explore these things a little bit more. Last year at AAAL in Portland, Dwight Atkinson convened a colloquium with some of the people in the photo, but not all of them are in the photo. And I think Diane Larsen-Freeman wasn't in the colloquium, but I mean, she was in the colloquium in the audience, and then we asked her to come and take the photo with us. But it's a group larger than this, definitely, and including some people from Southern epistemologies a little bit, perhaps not as much as I would like it, but SLA researchers, certainly, who we're trying to explore together synergies in different ways. I think I'm the one pushing the decolonial agenda into the discussion, and I will see how it goes with the rest of my colleagues. We are meeting again at AAAL 2024 in Houston, not to present, but behind doors, like we did with the Douglas Fir group. And Dwight was a main engineer of that one too, right? So we're meeting behind doors after the conference. We stay in the hotel for one more day just to discuss and hash out our aspirations for synergies coming in the next few years. So in conclusion, what is language learning about? Language learning is about language, for sure, but it's also about social context and identity and emotions and agency. And it's even more, it's about power and social transformation. And so my own idea of what bilingualism or multilingualism is gradient, fuzzy, and probabilistic. It comes in many shapes and grades, and currently in the field of second language acquisition, but also in the field of bilingualism, we're studying only a tiny slice of it. Multilingual language competencies and practices are irreducible to dichotomies like native, non-native, or competent, incompetent. And multilingualism and language learning are inequitable, deeply, deeply inequitable. But also, what dreams of social justice for SLA can we find? And can we find them in the voices, the knowledges, the ontologies of Southern indigenous decolonial perspectives on what reality, the world, ourselves could be in the otherwise? Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.